especially like when you got that first gig. What was that place called again?
Reader-supported news.
Reader-supported news?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you got that, did they have a little bit of that editorial process in the sense that, okay, I got the story, here's my 4 sources. Obviously, it's anonymous, but between us, like, here's who they are, here's how I think they have access. Like, did you get to learn that on the fly?
It was a pretty unglamorous job in the sense that a lot of the work was just...
I've had my friend Joby Warwick on the podcast a few times. I don't know if you ever seen his work before.
Not familiar.
So he's a long-time Washington Post guy, 2-time Pulitzer winner. He wrote the book Black Flags in 2015, 2016.
Oh, yeah, I know what this is, yeah.
Yeah, which is like the explanation book on ISIS and what that whole thing was. But he's very candid about that aspect of things when I talk with him, which I really appreciate. He's like, the best example is, you'll have guys come to you and say, hey, if you report this story, people are going to die. You did a great job. You got your finger on the pulse, but if you report this, X, Y, and Z are going to die, and it's blood's on your hands. And then he's like, we then have to go into a conference room, me and 2 editors, and decide if they're lying to us or if they're not, and, do we send it? And I don't envy that position because on the one hand, you're a bootlicker if you decide to crush a story and then you find out it's bullshit. Either way, people are going to paint it that way. And then on the other hand, it's like, you report it and then, maybe 70 people get blown up somewhere. Like, you got to sleep that night and think about that. But it's your job because there's supposed to be a bigger picture. It gets very, very weird.
Yeah, and try living in Washington where you have friends that you're going to lose if you say something a certain way. I mean, I was very careful and proscribed not to develop friendships with people because I knew that would happen. But I see a lot of younger people that don't know better, and they become friends with these guys. And so there's all these different forms of kind of, I call it soft blackmail, where it's not just you mentioned one, your career viability, your ability to make money, but I just as often, maybe even more, just see it as like, well, I don't want to, make my friend's life a headache, and I kind of get that. And so the solution to that is not to become friends with the things that you need to cover. And unfortunately, they're not going to teach you that in journalism school.
Right. Now, how many years again were you in DC?
About 4 years, I think.
So how would you do that? I mean, that's impressive because listen. It's really hard to talk with someone, 40 times for one story over a year-long period and, in that time, have a drink with them, hear about their family, talk about yours, have this human interaction and be able to keep up that wall while maintaining their trust. How did you do that?
So I approach sources differently. On the one hand, there tends to be a really big premium placed on senior high-level sources like 4-star generals, 3-star generals. Right. To give you an example, I reported on a bunch of documents that were leaked to me about the National Guard deployment to Los Angeles. And the reason I was able to do that before the Times and all the other outlets did, and report that it was called Operation Excalibur, which I thought was a funny kind of nerdy D&D kind of name. And I remember reporting that and thinking, how did no other media? Because everyone's looking at this thing that's like of political importance, federal government, imposing into a state. Like, what do we think about this? And obviously, the whole media was interested in it. And I remember thinking, how did I get that? And I realized, I talked to my editor about it. He says, it's because you talk to the mid-level guys. I was actually talking to the guardsmen. Many reporters are sort of trained to think, okay, you've got to talk to the 2-star general, the 3-star general. It's like this perspective that high up means better insight, and it's just not true. It's like saying that Jeff Bezos knows more about a fulfillment center than some guy working in it. Like, okay, he might know more about like leadership stuff, but he's not on the ground like, doing it,
Also, if you're just going to have to say, like, according to an anonymous source or a source close to the situation, in some ways, what's the difference? Because it's just about, does this person
Well, an editor would be like, well,
info?
This is just some guy. Like, how do we know that there's so much anxiety and fear about, like, if you're a 3-star general, you're basically a politician. And you have to know how to interact with other leadership elements and things. And so editors will see that and they'll kind of heave a sigh of relief that it's like, okay, this is some big fancy guy who knows the Washington game. He's not going to get out over his skis in something. And I don't really think that's true. I think they'll avoid political embarrassment. That doesn't mean that they won't get something wrong. But unfortunately, media, that's how a lot of editors think, is how do we not get laughed at by the New York Times or whatever it is,
How were you doing as like a renegade journalist, not trained through traditional journalist school and all that, when you were at the beginning, and especially like when you got that first gig, what was that place called again?
Reader-supported news.
Readers supported news.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you got that, did they have a little bit of that editorial process in the sense that, okay, I got the story, here's my 4 sources. Obviously it's anonymous, but between us, like, here's who they are, here's how I think they have access. Like, did you get to learn that on the fly?
It was a pretty unglamorous job in the sense that a lot of the work was just aggregative kind of stuff. So like to the extent that I did investigative stuff, it was kind of on your own time, which like I really like doing it, so I would do it regardless. If you're listening, you still have to pay me. But so because of that, it was just kind of like a lot on my own. And in retrospect, that was really nice because then you could sort of test things, see what works, experiment in a way that I think if I had somebody that micromanaged me more, I probably wouldn't have been able to do that.
Right. But if you're doing it at the end, it's less micromanagement, right? The way I understand, I've never been in these rooms, but the way I understand is like, you know, maybe at the New York Times or something like that, you got to constantly throughout working on a story, like check, you know, almost get the corporate check of approval at each step. But this sounds like it was more like you were doing something.
Yeah, no, it was much less structured than that because they just had so little money.
Now, you went to the Young Turks after that, which is more of like kind of renegade YouTube. And
and that was their investigative unit. So they, again, just kind of let me do my freedom because I wasn't a YouTuber.
Now, what was it like, though, at the Intercept? Because the Intercept is started by Glenn Greenwald and some other people who came at least from the mainstream world, have kind of those journalistic standards. Was that like a big culture change for you?
Huge. This was like the first corporate environment that I was in, literally the first meeting that we attended. And I quickly learned to hate the meetings.
Hard stop at 5.
Yeah. The first thing was like some consultant talking about, it was so bizarre. It was like talking about like psychoanalytic reasons to not be on social media or something. I was like, what is this? It was bizarre. And it was like, and I started talking to other corporate friends. They're like, oh yeah, these dumbass consultants. It sounds like you got a certain flavor of it, but that's what exists in all the big companies. I had never had a job at kind of a big fancy place before. So I was kind of like, am I crazy to maybe I don't get it? Like, and then slowly I realized, no, you're not crazy. You're just not someone that tolerates bureaucracy very well. But like you're saying, that place was largely staffed by the former editor-in-chief went on to work for the Washington Post. Many of them came from major institutions. So I guess because of Glenn Greenwald's presence, I had hoped that it would be more like, you know, pirate ship kind of thing. And
you knew Glenn before that?
Yes, we were friendly before that.
Got it.
And there were definitely people there doing cool work. But there were other people that, you know, were much more in the mainstream. And so I sort of found myself somewhere that I guess in retrospect, it wasn't really me.
Yeah. Now, what made you go there? Was it Glenn himself or?
Yeah. And the Snowden disclosures, I mean, I mentioned earlier that the whole reason I got into this stuff was like, you know, Occupy was going on, the collapse of the financial institution, and with that, any credibility that I think the intelligentsia had. And then the Snowden disclosures, just seeing, wow, primary source documents put out into the world can really change things. Like they have to deal with that. Yeah. They can't tell you to shut up. They have to say, what is this document about? And they have to address it. So yeah, I really respected that because they were the only place that and there was all this hand wringing about it. And we can talk about this now, but it's like the media's really lost its nerve. And story after story, they refuse to publish documents that they're in possession of. We mentioned the J.D. Vance dossier earlier. They just pass on things, sometimes without even explanation. Another one would be the Mangione manifesto. There's just increasingly
you released that too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I couldn't believe that they didn't publish this. It was basically all the major outlets had it. Clearly huge public interest in it. And again, it's not about do you publish or not. It's how do you report it responsibly. There's a way in which you can write it that doesn't glorify murder, that doesn't you know, in the case of the Vance dossier, that doesn't obscure the Iranian government's sponsorship of the hack that got those documents. You can inform people about all those things and provide context about all of that, but there's never a debate about it. It's just, no, we can't talk about this. It's very paternalistic because it's like you can't trust people to read this stuff because they're just automata that are going to, you know, it's like the Manchurian Candidate. They just hear the code word, they're going to snap into attention. And it's like, no, that's not how people are.
Right. Now let's go back to that actually for a minute because that was in the build up to the election in 24, right? So
yes.
This was maybe August, September, something like that. So you found out that they weren't going to release this. You had your hands on it. How did you get your hands on it? Through the actual leak from the Iranians online?
I don't. So I speak kind of critically of a lot of the mainstream institutions, but I'm friends with a lot of people at them. There are cool people at these places, so I don't want to say that there's no good work happening in a lot of them. There's weirdos like me that find themselves in there and they're trying to cause trouble. And so I start talking to some of them and they're all just like, yeah, we can't do this because of blah, blah. And I later found out they themselves got visits or communications with the FBI telling them, hey, this is a foreign influence thing. So there was a quiet thing going on in the background of a lot of these media institutions where, I mean, I guess the FBI would probably say, we're just warning them about the risk. But come on, they're clearly trying to get them not to talk about it.
Wait a minute. So the FBI was going to people in the media and saying, don't leak this because the Iranians leaked it.
Yeah. In one case, I think Reuters reported that even.
What did this dossier even say? I don't even remember.
All it was open source research that the Trump campaign did into J.D. Vance when they were considering whether or not to make him the vice president. And
so
it was a list of their
and
perceived liabilities. All of it was, the reason I was comfortable publishing it, I wouldn't publish something like the Steele dossier, for instance.
Right.
Because I don't want to just put out rumors that nobody knows if it's true. It's not right. Even if it's about someone very powerful, it's just a bunch of BS, you know? So it's like, I might talk about it or say there's this thing going around. But in this case, it was an easy call because it's like all of this stuff are his publicly verifiable positions. I just went down the list. He said everything that they said he said.
So it made sense.
Yeah, it's just all factual. There's no risk of defamation. There's no innuendo. So to me, it was an easy call, and I couldn't understand why the rest of the press did. And in fact, reporters I knew at these outlets couldn't understand it either. They were like, this is really weird. Because in 2016, we had the hacked Clinton emails, and I support publishing those things as long as you explain where it comes from and let people come to their own decisions. I don't see this as any different from that, so I don't understand why it was a big to-do.
That's wild, though, because like you just said, 2016, you have the whole Clinton thing. 2020 of the Hunter Biden thing, where we know also the FBI and intelligence got involved and was like, don't talk about this. Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.